As the White House reviews the Democratic rebuttal to the memo released last week, House Speaker Paul Ryan is weighing in.
He says it's important that Americans know if the government is abusing surveillance capabilities, even if it includes details about an ongoing investigation.
You're the press. You're the avatars of the First Amendment, protecting a critical component of our civil liberties. FISA abuse matters to each and every one of us as citizens. And if our government abused the FISA process, a very unique selective process, which, if mishandled, could complicate and compromise in American civil liberties, we should care about that. So this is about making sure that our civil liberties as citizens are protected in the FISA court and that it is not politicized.
For more on this now, we want to bring in James Hohmann. He's a national political correspondent for the Washington Post. So, James, what are you hearing from your sources on Capitol Hill about the Democrats' rebuttal memo? We know that it's 10 pages long, and the speaker talked about concerns about that it may reveal a little too much. But what are you hearing?
Yeah, I think that there was obviously some concern about that, but the rebuttal memo really undercuts two or three of the central premises of the Republican memo that was released last Friday. The Republican memo basically says that the Justice Department used this dossier that was made by someone who was working at the behest of the Clinton campaign, that they used that information to get a court to authorize surveillance of Carter Page, a former advisor to Trump. What Democrats tell me is that the rebuttal memo shows that, in fact, that really wasn't the main thing, that it was one of dozens and dozens of things that were mentioned, and that also that a judge was told that this research was done by a politically motivated actor, that there was more documentation to back things up. The Republican memo also said that Andy McCabe, who was the deputy FBI director until last week, claimed during a closed-door Intelligence Committee hearing that it was the dossier that was the main reason that they authorized surveillance. The rebuttal memo includes the full context and the full quote from McCabe, which shows that that actually is not what McCabe said, thereby undercutting, again, a central premise of the Republican argument.
James, this isn't partisan when we talk about this. The fact that House Speaker Paul Ryan sits up there in front of a camera and says we want to ensure that this process is not political, when it is absolutely become political in this House Intelligence Committee, and nearly every intelligence official, former deputy director of the CIA that I've spoken to, Mike Morrell, others have suggested that up until this period, the work that the House Intelligence Committee did on both the House side and the Senate side was sacred. It actually extended beyond partisan bickering around issues that Republicans and Democrats argue about when it comes to marriage and, pro-life or pro-choice. This was something that they thought was their sacred responsibility in protecting the American people, in overseeing these intelligence agencies. And for House Speaker Paul Ryan to sit there and say, we're trying to ensure this is not political, when you had to have had 4 different judges who agreed to put Carter Page under surveillance, that the activities that Mr. Page was engaged in predated the Steele dossier, from what I understand, and tell me if I'm wrong about that. I just don't understand how he can sit there and say that with a straight face to the American people.
Well, Vlad, I think you're onto something here, which is that Paul Ryan is on defense. I think Republicans recognize that they've really gotten creamed in the court of public opinion over the past week, and that's why the clip we just heard from the speaker from a few minutes ago is a reflection of how Republicans are in damage control mode. They think Devin Nunes has embarrassed them once again, and Ryan is trying to reframe this whole debate to make it so that it's not about Bob Mueller or the special counsel or the Russia investigation at all. If you listen to that clip, Paul Ryan is trying to make this about civil liberties, about FISA, and that is a reflection of them losing this fight politically. So they started it. It was totally political, completely, and now they're trying to clean it up and make it kind of stop the bleeding here. That's why Ryan is talking the way he is.
Should the Democrats, though, to that point, should the Democrats then even come out with a rebuttal memo? Have people suggested that, look, by engaging in this game, if the memo on itself turned out to be a dud, as some people have suggested, because of the very reasons we've been talking about, why engage in a tit for tat? Why not just move on and talk about the things that are facing Americans today? The DACA issue, immigration, talking about
Yeah, that's a fair question, but I think it's important for transparency's sake. There's 40% of the country who supports President Trump. If you're watching, certain TV channels all the time, you get a very misleading view of the truth. And the rebuttal memo puts the facts out there. I think that there are a lot of people, sort of well-intentioned Americans, who maybe read the misleading cherry-picked Republican memo and are good faith citizens who want to understand the issue. And if they read the facts in the Democratic memo, they would have a fuller picture. So you're absolutely right. We never want to compromise sources and methods or undercut intelligence. But at this point, the genie's sort of out of the bottle. And I think Democrats on Capitol Hill and frankly, Republicans at this point want both of these memos to be out there so that it doesn't look like something's being hidden as we have this conversation.
Right. So speaking about what Americans are really interested in, we have a looming government shutdown. House Republicans are expected to vote on a bit of a stopgap measure, a short-term spending bill, but it doesn't address the border wall. It doesn't address DACA. So what exactly is in this legislation?
They're just kicking the can down the road a little bit. They're trying to get a little bit more money for the military. The sequester has been in place for a couple of years. So to get the votes of defense hawks, they're upping military spending a little bit. But really, all this really is kicking the can down the road for a couple of weeks, not actually dealing with the underlying funding issues and trying to avoid yet another government shutdown. But it is very paralyzing for government when they wait 2 weeks at a time to find out how much money they're going to get for their programs.
And James, before we let you go, you've got an article today on the Washington Post Daily 202 called "Why Trump Flippantly Accusing Democrats of Treason is Not a Laughing Matter." Now, this comes, of course, after the president said it was un-American and treasonous when some congressional Democrats sat during last week's State of the Union address, as the party in opposition has done since the very first time a president went up and did this to both houses of Congress. What can you tell us? Just give us a little bit more detail into your piece.
Yeah, I think it's really a White House spokesman this morning saying the president made that comment tongue-in-cheek. But there's nothing funny about treason. It's punishable by death. It's the only crime that's explicitly defined in the Constitution. It's very clear that it is working against the United States in an act of war to help an enemy of the United States. Barack Obama, George W. Bush never would have talked like this about their political opponents, regardless of their party. It's non-constructive, and it's part of a bigger pattern where the president sort of misuses big, loaded words, and he uses them so often that it sort of diminishes their real potency and value. Treason is a really big deal. It's not something you should just flippantly go around accusing your opponents of. I think if Obama had done it, Republicans would have appropriately flipped out, and it's just kind of another Monday for Donald Trump.
It's striking to me. It's so important that you point this out, James, because it is a crime. It is punishable by death. And what I sometimes struggle to understand is, if President Obama took offense to some of the things that were written or said about him, specifically by the current president of the United States, the way that the president seems to think, it's like President Obama would have had every intention of locking him up. He could have been a political dissident, because the president doesn't seem to like anybody who criticizes him, including members of Congress. He takes that as an offense.
It's so dangerous just to impugn the motives of your opponents. And that's one of the reasons there's so much tribalism in the country. It's so hard. We can't even, again, we were just talking about, fund the government for more than 2 weeks. And it's because there's this concerted campaign to suggest that somehow if you don't agree with the president, you don't love America. And that's not, that's sort of not what America's all about, which is dissent. And as you note, has been what we've been about, the hallmark of America since the beginning.
That's un-American.
Exactly right. Will there be any, here's the question, James, I think, will there be any repercussions at all from the President of the United States accusing other Americans who are in opposition to some of his policies as treasonous?
Well, what's striking here, and to get to your question, the reason it's important and significant is that Republicans aren't coming out and condemning him. Only one of 51 Republican senators has said that the president shouldn't have said that. Jeff Flake, the retiring senator from Arizona. And so I think that there sort of is a duty of leaders to go out there and say this kind of language isn't okay. And we're not seeing that from Republicans. And it really says a lot about how afraid they are of being on the wrong side of the president and drawing his ire.
James Hohmann, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.